Hi, good morning. My name is James. I'm an outdoor host and enthusiast, and I'm lucky enough to be here at the Malahat Skywalk at the beginning of our 600-meter elevated walkway to our 10-story tower that rises above this coastal Douglas fir biogeoclimatic zone. I'll get into that a little bit later, but first I do want to acknowledge gratefully that we are on the ancestral and traditional lands of the Malahat Nation, part of the Coast Salish peoples. We are lucky enough to be here because this is an amazing place. We have mountains and fjords, large trees, and of course Douglas firs, but also Gary oak, arbutus trees, and others. Some of these very large and impressive structures and views can sometimes take us away from acknowledging and noticing some of the smaller organisms that are in and around us that are equally as important to our survival and our long-term happiness. So today we're going to look at some of those. This is, as I said, our first Connecting to Nature live. We do welcome your questions. If we don't get to all your questions and aren't able to answer them all, we'll certainly follow up on that and put it out on our Facebook page and blog. So let's go into some of the things that have brought me here. I am extremely lucky to have had parents that encouraged me to be in the outdoors and to not only see nature as something outside of me, but as something connected to me and part of me. And so it's with those eyes of a child that I try and examine everything that I do happen to come across in nature, full of questions and excitement and enthusiasm. So I hope that I can share some of that with you, and I know many of you bring that with you as well. So behind me we actually have some of the smaller things that we see in nature here. Many of you know about moss. You can see moss growing on many trees and rocks in and around. Moss is actually something that's been on the planet for at least 450 million years, so about 5,000 times longer than we as modern humans. And if it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have the amazing world around us. These are actually part of the pioneer species that started to develop even while there were still large expanses of just barren rock left over from, in various eras, either glaciers grinding right down to the stone, volcanoes that obviously cover everything with new rock, also fire, which is very important to the ecosystem and its regeneration over the years. So moss, as most of us know, is a plant. It is actually what's referred to as a non-vascular plant because it actually doesn't have roots. It has rhizoids that actually connect it to either trees or to rock or any other substrate. It gets most of its moisture from the air. It can actually absorb fog. It doesn't have to be in the form of rain. And moss can actually get up to 5 times its body weight with water that it has absorbed. So it's very important for the other species around it. It also does help to provide a habitat and a starting point for other seedlings that do drop into it. So we're very lucky that we do have large amounts of moss around. We also have lots of these creatures around here. These organisms are actually not moss, even though for years, up until very recently, I thought they were moss. They're actually lichens, and lichens are not a plant. They're actually a combined organism, the result of the symbiotic relationship between fungus and algae and sometimes cyanobacteria. And these get together to actually create a new, very survivable organism. This organism actually can do a lot of the things that we understand plants can do. It can photosynthesize using sunlight to take carbon dioxide and make oxygen, and also produce food. And at the same time, it does a very important thing. It can actually help to what we call fix nitrogen and put it into a form that other plants can use in their development. So it actually, in this case, lichen can take nitrogen from the air and actually turn it into a usable form of nitrogen. Basically, if you can imagine, a natural fertilizer for other creatures. There are actually 3 different categories of lichen. I won't get into all the different species of lichen because apparently I've now discovered there are over 14,000 different types of lichen around the world, and there are 3,700 of those just in North America, so it kind of boggles the mind. Many of the ones that we're used to actually sometimes are, in the common parlance, called mosses. So you'll hear of old man's beard moss, Methuselah's moss. Sometimes they'll refer to it as deer hair, bear hair, witch's hair. And that is this particular type of lichen that I have behind here. It's actually known as freticose lichen. Freticose lichen actually comes from a Latin word meaning shrub. So it is shrub-like. It either hangs down in long, almost hair-like structures, or in some cases it can actually stick up like a small shrub. We also have foliose lichen. Foliose lichen actually, as you can imagine from the word, has 2 sides on it like a leaf. Foliose lichen you'll often see either on the side of a tree, or it actually also may be on the ground, because it is actually very important. One of the names for it is reindeer lichen, because it actually is thought to allow reindeer and elk and deer to survive through the very, very hardy, difficult times of the winter. And the final type of lichen is actually something referred to as crustose lichen. So crustose lichen, as it sounds, looks like, almost like makeup in many cases, or little tiny little swirls that are actually attached right onto either rock or trees. So those are the 3 major types of lichen. They all do some pretty amazing things. As I said, they help to help create, similar to moss, photosynthesizing and providing us with large amounts of oxygen. They can actually provide large amounts of food for each other, but also for other plants and animals. And they are one of the pioneer species that shows up after these large events. Either volcanoes or fires or glaciers go through and grind down to the rock. They can actually, over decades or hundreds or even thousands of years, take large amounts of rock and turn it into soil that is then usable by other plants. So that's a really important thing. And when I talked about them being hardy, and they're also close to 500 million years existence on this planet, they've actually done tests by sending them into outer space, and certain types of lichen have actually been able to survive in bare space. So not only do they look otherworldly, it's possible that they are otherworldly. So something that on many space missions they're looking for in other planets, something that might look like lichen, that might be an indication that there are signs of life on that planet. Another important thing that they do, they also, lichen, have the ability to go dormant, and they will actually look as if they are dead. And then once there's moisture in the air or water coming down in the form of rain or even flooding over, they can actually kick back into life and get back into full action and start to grow and develop. So that's a really important thing in the cases of things like forest fires, where they can actually survive that sort of event where many other plants can't. And so this is a unique form of life. As I said, combination of fungus and algae and sometimes cyanobacteria. So lichen and mosses are very good indicators of the health of the area that we're in. If you see lots of lichen and moss, that means that you're living in a very healthy area. Then scientists are actually testing lichens and moss frequently to see what sort of bacterial substances and what sort of pollutants have actually made their way into the lichens. So if you come into a forest and you don't see a lot of moss and lichen, and there seems to be plenty of moisture, suggests that there might be something in the air that we don't, as humans, want either. So as I mentioned earlier, we certainly welcome any of your questions, and if we don't get to them today, we'll certainly get back to you or bring them up on our future Friday Nature Facts. So we thank you so much for being with us and look forward to our next Connecting with Nature Live.